That is the lovely sound, hopefully it's lovely out there, of a 62 sorry, not enough coffee yet in the day, 62 restored concert, though that is not the stock speakers, because the stock speakers in that amp are long gone, and the speakers that are in that amp, the owner and I have agreed, sound like ass, and they're going away. So that was through my shop cab. And yes, that was an 8 ohm load on the 2 ohm output. At that volume, it's not hurting anything. You got to know when to hold them, when to fold them. That was a safe mismatch for a short period of time at 2.5 on the volume. That thing is going to sound so good when it gets its new permanent 10-inch speakers. Good morning, afternoon, evening to everyone, depending on what time of the day it is where you live, including Crazy Brad who's up in the middle of the night. And yes, that is Harmonic Trim Yo Yo Yo. There are lots of good digital recreations of it in various devices, from the Flint to all the Axe effects and Helix stuff, and there are analog versions of it, and they're all pretty cool. But very few things really sound like the deal. The question anyone has to ask themselves, is it worth spending so much money for that one really cool trick? It is a very cool trick. And the rest of the amp has things to recommend it, but it's not too dissimilar from the normal channel of a super reverb. It's nice to hear the real deal once in a while, to remind ourselves of what it's supposed to be. And it's interesting from a technical background. The is bugging me. I'm going to turn the intensity down. Even a restored one does that when the intensity is on 10. It's interesting to compare that circuit to what's in the Vox. It's very, very similar in a lot of ways to what's in the AC30. The old JMI circuit, and it's very similar in a lot of ways to what Magnatone did. The Magnatone used inductors, not inductors, varistors, and then they did some stereo stuff. Hey, and 378 amps has got a gin and tonic, and here I am in the background. I wish I had a gin and tonic. It's not quite hot enough for that here yet. To me, that is lawn mowing. As a lawn mowing drink, or hey, if we're in New Orleans, let's have a G&T kind of drink. Let's see, Marcus, you got a question for us. Let's share with the group. How do you know if you have sufficient ground solder to a chassis or a bus? Is continuity on a meter good enough? Well, you want continuity and you want mechanical strength. So in general, a mechanical connection, so a 270-degree wire wrap around a bus or through the lugs of a solder tap, soldering ground lug, is the best way to do it, and it's better to have those things attached to chassis with the proper steel screws, with lock nuts or nylock nuts. The issue is when you have an old Fender where the old grounds were made to chassis by soldering directly to the chassis, and there the mechanical strength depends to a degree on the quantity of solder, but mostly the quality of solder. So what I do on those is I score the metal. I score the steel with a hardened steel screwdriver tip and make a crosshatch pattern. and then I clean that thoroughly, and that roughed up section gives the solder something to grab onto. And then I tin that spot, and you have to use a very hot iron. I use an 80 watt for that. And the iron I use is in the description of all the videos for the past year or so. And once you heat up that iron, that solder enough that, sorry, I can't talk today. Once you heat up that area of the chassis enough that when you touch solder to that area of the chassis, the solder flows, not touching solder to the tip beyond tinning the tip. You want to have that a very, very hot area of that chassis so the solder flows when it touches that metal. And once that is tinned, then everything will stick to that pretty much. You just don't want to have any mechanical strain on that joint. So if you notice when I do a ground, it's never a tight wire to that spot. There's always going to be a loop of wire to that spot. On a ground wire for the AC safety ground, I'll have a long loop going back on itself. So there's no strain on that joint. And in normal use, it will never come undone. So mechanical considerations, as well as the electrical. Hope that helps. If you have any other questions on if that wasn't clear enough, ask some more. I will learn how to speak soon. Sorry. The Flint has a very good tremolo, and the plate reverb is very good, and the spring's okay. The trouble with the Flint, both V1 and V2, is that it has a very high noise floor. And I think, as I've said many other times, digital stuff should not have a high noise floor, but Strymon stuff does. And this is with very good power supplies. I'm talking about Chucks. I'm talking about Strymon supplies. I'm talking True Tone. So not just a little wall wart thing or the built-in switch mode thing that they give with all those things, because those are always terrible. Let's see. Hello, hello. Surge98 says, I want to do a Dumble Overdrive Special as my second build. Any advice for this type of build? I would not suggest a Dumble as anyone's second build, depending on how much you want to implement it. If you're going to do the full thing with the boosts and the 3 switches and the MIDI port on the back used for foot switching, I would tell any would-be builder to have a lot of less complicated amps under the belt first, a lot, and have very, very good soldering technique and very, very good lead dress technique, and most crucially, the ability to think 5 steps ahead. It's like really playing vertical chess with those things. You got to say, all right, to get to the end, I need to do this layer of wiring first, because this I can't, later in the build, I won't be able to access this. So there are people who can do it as a second build. There are probably people who could do it as a first build. These people are rare, and I don't think that I would have been able to do a Dumble on my second build or my 20th build. It's, you know, I'm not saying that Howard Alexander was doing something magical, but of analog eyelet board construction amps out there, it is one of the most complicated you can do. And I would suggest building the amps it is derived from first. Maybe build a 63 6G6 Bassman. Maybe build an AA864 or AB165 Bassman. Those are the amps that Dumble started from, and then go from there. Or build one of those and then turn it into a Dumble if you don't have a custom faceplate or anything. But as far as the numbers, I'm only familiar with the schematic of the 124. I'd have to look at the actual trace dot schematic of the 102 and the 183 to be able to tell you what the differences are and what they would sound like. I tend not to look at such things because I mean this kindly. I don't care. I don't want to build an amp that sounds just like Robin Ford's Dumble, unless my client is Robin Ford, in which case I'd sit down and listen to him play and talk about what he likes and doesn't like about all his amps. And I'd be able to, I might accidentally end up at the same place as the 124, but it would not be like my automatic starting point. That was how Howard got to the desired result. If I'm going to spend that much time to building something, I want to have my own creative input into it. And if the client doesn't like it, so be it. You don't have to pay for it. But if I'm going to do something like that, I'm going to do something like that. I know that can sound pig-headed, but really, if you don't have some kind of creative feedback in this and some kind of long-term enjoyment from this kind of stuff, it could be like changing tires for a living. Hey, Macass guitar, I guess it is. With the recent lack of reliable rectifier tubes, well, I'm not sure how recent it is, but is it generally safe to use the solid-state plug-in rectifiers instead of the tube? Yeah, it's safe as long as you are aware of two things. First of all, you will need to rebias regardless of anything else. Second of all, you need to make sure that the unloaded B plus does not exceed the ratings of the filter capacitors. So if you have a unloaded B plus of 470 volts with a 5U4 GB, you can have an unloaded B plus of over 500 volts with solid state, and in which case, over time, your 500 volt rated caps can die. Now, there's not a lot of current present when no tubes are drawing current, so it's not an immediate death sentence, but it's not a good idea. And you may not like the sound as much because people are like, oh, the sag. Sag's part of it. Sag's way overstated in terms of importance. But as the B plus goes up, every voltage throughout the audio path goes up. Your preamp circuit goes up. You get more headroom, and the response of everything becomes different, and the pick attack becomes different. Now, a note on the pick attack changing. And the pick attack changing from solid state to tube rectification, or the pick attack changing due to all these things I'm talking about, you will have a more dramatic change if you change which pick you're generating the pick attack with than things like this. But it all adds up, and you need to be aware of it cumulatively. It's not like going from a Jazz 3 to a Fender Thin or anything, but you can feel the difference in the amps, and the amp that you've always loved may not have the right mojo to you anymore, and that's a catch-all phrase. But just used to be if I did this, it did that, and now that does something different, or it does the same thing at a later volume, or if I have to do something else when I pick, so your old friend may not be as recognizable, but in general, it is safe. How critical is a three-prong plug on an old outboard Fender Reverb if playing through a brown box? Michael, it's critical because there's high voltages in the old Fender Reverb. The issue is it's really difficult to avoid ground loops with a Fender Reverb and something else. And I don't feel comfortable discussing the options here in this format because someone could misunderstand what I'm saying and kill themselves. But there are ways to lift grounds with diodes and capacitors. And it can be done within the amp. It can be done with a, what's it called? Somewhere over there, which I'll find right after the stream, there's a hum eliminator kind of device, but it is not entirely as safe as having a good audio ground. The real way to do it is you keep, not audio ground, safety ground. The real way is you keep the safety ground and the chassis always grounded, and you lift all the audio stuff, all the circuitry, the DC and audio circuit inside the box from that with those diodes and capacitors. So if you look at the reissue Reverb, they did that very well, but it's really difficult to do with an old Fender Reverb unit. It's important though. It doesn't matter if you're going to a brown box or direct to wall. Brown box in theory does not change the ground. If they are changing the ground, they'd be illegal to sell. Hey, Alex 2112. Hey, Strumbum, you just got a 74 Deluxe Reverb, filter caps, and all electrolytic caps should be done. So that's the cathode bypass caps. Now, if they were done 10 years ago, the cathode bypass caps may be fine. In general, the lower voltage caps last longer than the higher voltage caps. But as you could see in that video I put up yesterday on the old Princeton, where that Sprague atom in the bias supply with only like 50 volts on it from 2016 was already spewing its guts. So as far as 5U4 versus GZ34, it's really going to depend on the sound you want, and more critically, it's going to depend on the screen voltage present. So if you've got 450 volts on the screens, it's not going to be as happy as if you have 420 volts on the screens. So the GZ34 may be a bad choice compared to the 5U4, because the 5U4 is going to have a lower B+, and your screens will tend to be happier. Hey, ET has joined us. Hey, Andy, I will get to everyone. I appreciate it. I try to keep an eye on what's happening in real time versus getting to all the stuff here as it was asked. Let's see, Buddy with an H. His one-channel 6G3 ground hum in the preamp he asked about is finally solved. He lifted the HT center tap, moved it to the B+ ground, and had one ground bus to jack. Silent. Yeah, the HT center tap ground should always be grounded. Well, the B+ ground, is your 6G3 a kit? Because in the originals, there's not a B+ ground. There's a reservoir ground and an HT ground, and a bias ground, and then all the other filter caps are grounded over by the preamp. So it's not guesswork. Without seeing your amp, the important thing there to remember is that the HT center tap and the reservoir ground, followed by the AC safety ground, are the noisiest grounds in your amp. So if you can keep those separate from all the others, then you will have an absence of hum like you're getting. So I think you got there perhaps by accident, but it is not just a guessing game. You have to know what's going on. But without seeing your amp, I can't tell you exactly what you did. Well, if you built it in a 5F2 chassis and you have the HT to reservoir and then to a bus which is going to ground by the preamp, you did get a little bit lucky. Amateur guitar guy with an iPhone. Hello. Sorry, I can't talk today. Most days I speak English very good. I learned it from a book. Hey, Postamo, you're welcome. I don't remember what advice I gave you. I hope it was good. Okay, it was DC leakage. Good. Yeah. Yay. Well, I'm very glad to hear that. I can't take too much credit for it. It's just, hey, the board absorbs moisture. Hey, isopropyl drives out moisture. It's like the world was designed just for us to solve these problems. Thanks, Paul. Appreciate that. Paul, we got a good thing going here, baby. Let's see. All right. So Gooden's got a video up on fiberglass bristle scratch brushes. That is the most exciting video I've ever heard of. Let's all stop this right now and go watch a video on fiberglass bristle brushes. I'm kidding, Gooden. I mean, that's all very important stuff. And every tool has its place. Nous sommes là. Hello from Orléans. Good. I guess bonsoir to you and your time. Thank you, Michael Fielka. Hey, Matt. Yeah, the poison sumac has cleared up, but if you can see, I have flake where the old skin is just peeling off, especially in between my fingers. I've got new, fresh skin, and little flaps of, yeah, you can even see it in the thumbnail. It was really gross a couple days ago. By the way, do I look orange? On the videos that I put out for you guys, I have a meter where I can move the skin tone exactly where it needs to be. So I think I've got that down. But I'm red-green colorblind, and I'm not a good judge of such things and this kind of stuff. I look peachy. Well, that's okay. I'm a little bit tanned. So as long as I don't look like an Oompa Loompa or green. I did the live stream with Keith Williams, and I was reliably told that I was looking a bit green, a bit overexposed. Okay. Does everyone else agree that I'm overexposed? Because I can easily fix that. Let's see. Maybe a click or two. All right, just... How's that? That looks a little bit muted on my screen, but it's still mega bright on the preview screen on the camera. Let's see. It's so hard to color balance and light balance different screens to each other, especially since they all have brightness controls. What's the starting point? Anyway, how important is a choke to an AC 1530? Would a dropping resistor be sufficient? That's a good question. From one perspective, a choke and a resistor serve the same purpose, to decouple stages from each other. The issue is that the choke is much more efficient than the resistor, but the choke is larger and more expensive. Of course, the choke doesn't have as many heat issues as a resistor does either, because the choke is playing with inductance and the resistor only has really resistance. So in general, if you replace a choke with a resistor to get the same amount of filtering, you need to increase the capacitance after that node. So if you look at an AC30 with a choke, the second node may just be 22 microfarad. If you look at the AC15 and AC30 custom, which use a resistor instead of a choke, and that's fine, by the way, because of the way they do it, they have a 100 microfarad cap for the screen node. And I played around with decreasing that, and 47 is as small as you need to go there, otherwise you get hum. But the stock 100 is fine. Does not negatively affect the sound because of other stuff involving a ton of math between going between a pure resistive RC filter network versus an LC filter network. And if you want to know more about such things, there are literal textbooks on the subject, but I would suggest starting with thevalvewizard.co.uk, because he gets into such things in his books on power amp design. But yeah, LC filtering and RC filtering and then LCR filtering. It's all, you can really bore yourself to tears while learning an awful lot on this stuff. And you have to know all this stuff to do what I do. I just tend not to overshare the boring side with you guys. Hey, OU, I had a Valvetronics back in the day when they first came out. I had the big 120 version. There aren't any good mods for it. The mods I would suggest, make sure all your hardware is tight. You know, about every 6 months, take a soft bristle vacuum like you use on upholstery and clean out the inside, and that really helps an awful lot. And it takes two 12x7s. Make sure they're nice. It's a very nice sounding amp. For what it is. I think today I would not spend the money for one. I think today the Katana is a better choice. But you know, talking what, 1998 when the Valvetronics came out, it was really good. But you can't mod it. Hey JDS, you're currently in need of owning a good 76 for your reliable classic amp for home use, what would I recommend? Well, 76 is a tough year for Fender. They were way into their decline as far as things which make the amp difficult to keep going. They had the glued-in dado board, which once it's damaged, it becomes expensive to repair. They had the separate baffle frame with the grill cloth velcroed to the actual baffle. That thing always warps and never sits right and never looks great. They had the silver panel where only like 2 of the pots were actually on top of the panel. All the others are recessed. And the right end, if you ever lose that special washer around the indicator bulb, things just going to go flapping in the breeze. And the boards are covered in wax and tons of excess spaghetti wiring. So a 76 Twin with about $400 worth of work can sound as good as the 66 Twin. But there's the cost of the amp and then that $400 to get it to undo all the accountants saving costs back in 1976, and you still be better off if you got a replacement cab. So, as far as reliable classic amps in 1976, I'd say that was a very good year for Marshall and a very disappointing year for Fender. Vox was not really in the running, or in a lot of the companies that we talk about now were not really doing anything very good guitar-wise in 76. I guess you could get an Ampeg V2. That'd be good. You could, might be some Orange stuff. I'm not sure. That was more of a UK thing. I think Jazz Chorus was 78, so I guess that's off the table. If you get a 76 Fender, I would not suggest a Twin for home use. So find a Princeton or Deluxe. It'll also cost less to restore. Hey Mario, what do I think of Victory amps? I've only had 2 models. One was a Duchess, one was something that looked and sounded just like the Duchess. They were both the lunchbox style. I've not had the full size, I've only had the lunchbox style. Inside, for the price point, they were very well built. When they do need eventual large service, they can be very expensive because you've got to take the entire thing apart to change out a filter cap or anything. So they got an awful lot of stuff in a small enclosure, which means that if it ever needs serious service, it's going to be artificially expensive to repair it because you have to take everything out to get to the bottom. But the ones I had in, fortunately, they both had, not fortunate that they had this problem, but fortunately the problem each amp had was the heater balance resistors burned on the board, and I could replace those without taking the whole thing apart. I snipped out the old resistors and put new resistors up in the air from tube socket to ground, and that fixed that without doing anything heroic. But that was one of the things, it was one of the few serious repairs on that amp that would be possible to do without fully disassembling it. So notice that a lot of the guys that are using them online are selling them or are paid reviewers or are sponsored, endorsed by Victory. So maybe that's not fair to see, but I don't see a lot of people gigging with Victories or buying them. I see a lot of as featured on YouTube. So I'm not sure how reliable they're going to be long term. But that's speculative. Purely speculative on my part. I understand that they're much more popular and commonplace in the UK, and maybe hundreds of guys use them every weekend with no problems at all. So I just think they're on the verge of promising a free lunch with everything they put into that amp for that size. Hello, everyone. Even Robin Ford is moving away from his Dumble to smaller amps. Yeah, but anyway, I don't want to get into the Little Walter garbage. Let's see. Amateur guitar guy with an iPhone. Any pointers on where to look on a Fender 65 Twin reissue? 65 Twin Reverb. Very different than the reissue. Where the reverb has stopped working. All I'm getting is a buzz when it's engaged, which raises the reverb level when the reverb is increased. Well, first of all, make sure that your tank is connected, both at the chassis end and within the reverb bag. Second of all, make sure that the reverb tank is good. Many times those tanks will physically break. You pull them out of the bag and you take the bottom cover off, and the springs are just floating around because they broke off. So if you pull the tank out of the back of the amp, out of the bag, and you look at it and all the springs are still attached, nothing's loose inside, and there are 4 wires, 2 at each end, going from the RCA jacks to little square cube things on the ends of the tank. If either of those wires are broken, you'll get that symptom. It's possible for you to have a dead tank and it looks fine. The next thing to do is you take the tank with the amp on and you just put it down and tap on the tank. Do you hear the reverb thunder coming back? In which case your problem is in the reverb send stage. If you don't hear that thunder, the problem's in the reverb recovery stage. If you're hearing the level change as you turn the knob up, then that part of the circuit is probably fine. If you have guitar, that tube V4, the fourth from the right, looking at the rear, is probably fine, but you can swap that. It could also be a bad driver tube, V3, the 12AT7, the third from the right, looking from the rear of the amp. The easiest way for most owners to tell would be to swap V3 and V6. Those are the two 12AT7s. The V6 is your phase inverter, V3 is your reverb driver. If you swap them and you have no sound, because the bad tube that was in V3, that was what was driving your reverb, is now your phase inverter, you won't hear anything. So do all that and then report back. But the tubes and the reverb tank are the most likely cause of your problems, and both those things can be done by anyone without pulling the amp. Jay Vaughn, are Rivera amps good quality? Yes, they're very good quality. I don't think they're the world's best quality because they tried to please an awful lot of people, and they put an awful lot of features in there, and as a result you have some complicated low voltage supply stuff that wears out over time. A lot of Riveras are from the 90s, and they have a lot of push-pull pots that are PCB mounted, and they use a non-standard pot. It's not like an alpha dual gang with a standard footprint. The only place I know to get the exact footprint dual gang push-pull pots that they use are from Rivera. So as long as Rivera has stock, that's great. But if they go out of business or they run out of the stuff that they ordered in 1994, so to me that impacts the quality versus, the 58 Bassman in the thumbnail where I'm holding up the board, where all that failed, but I can get all those parts still. Every pot can be changed out. There's the Schematics argument, but at the same time, there's nothing in that amp that cannot be easily replaced. And seriously easily replaced if one thing needs to be changed. Whereas the Rivera, you tend to have chain reaction failures in the low voltage supplies. You've got to take the whole thing apart to change out one part, and then they have those very specialized pots. But within those constraints, they are built very, very well. Hey, Jimmy Mac, thanks for hurrying back. I won't make that joke again, sorry. What do I think about the Marshall 18-watt circuit? Well, first of all, there's the real one and there's the reissue. I'm going to discuss the real one, how it treats the old 84s, our AC15 30 circuits similarly hard on tubes. A lot of those circuits are cruel on EL84s because they copied what the British military was doing. Not the British military, the British hi-fi scene was doing in the late 50s. The Vox designer came from the hi-fi world, and in the hi-fi world in Britain at that time, the goal was to have as little screen grid resistance as possible because it was felt to be undesirable. And so they grudgingly put 100 ohm half-watt screen grid resistors on the EL84s, and Jim Marshall was not an amp designer. Jim Marshall was a marketing guy, and he was making new variations of things to please his clients and satisfy a demand, and he did a good job at it. But the JTM 45 is a straight copy with a few changed parts and different different components because what's available in England of a 58 Bassman. including copying the schematic versus what was actually sent out by Fender. Similarly, the 1974X is borrowing an awful lot both from Vox and from the Gibson GA18T, and they copied the output section stuff from Vox. Vox got away with it. Jim Marshall got away with it. Watkins got away with it. Yes, Adam Planch. It's also a Watkins thing, which Watkins was looking over Vox's shoulder. But they all copied that stupid, as small a grid stopper value as possible. Not stopper, is a screen grid stopper. Screen grid resistance as possible. And they got away with it because they were using Mullards and Brimars from 1961 and 64, etc., which were incredibly rugged tubes, which have not been made to that quality in 40, 50 years. So, if you use that same circuit, which Mullards could survive, with current production EL84s, current production EL84s will die. So the fix there is to bump up the screen grid resistor from 100 ohms to at least 470 ohms, preferably 1K or 1.5K, depending on the voltages present. And then you want a cathode biased EL84 to be somewhere between 12 and 14 watts idle, not 19 watts idle like Matchless does. So, if I get in a Marshall 18 watt, and I've had a few on the channel, I make those changes. I tell the owner, hey, do you want this the way it was when it left the factory in 1966? Or do you want to not have to have new tubes every 3-4 months? And they usually say, well, tell me more about this not changing tubes option. And then I will say, hey, come on over. I'll let you hear each way. Here's the stock one that eats tubes, and flip a switch. This is what it would sound like without the tube eaters. And they don't hear a difference, or if they do hear a difference, they like the difference in compression. Even Brian May changes those on his AC30s. That screen grid is increased, and he's probably the hardest person on AC30s on the planet, but he even says, yeah, we need to make the tubes last longer. You sold your SG. I'm sorry. You can't solve the lack of sustain above the 12th fret. Apparently it's an SG thing. I have no lack of sustain above the 12th fret here. I don't want to argue with Tom. He's not. If Tom, if you see this, you want to come on the channel and argue with me, come on. I'll move over to the right. We'll get another microphone. You can I'll have coffee, or you can have beer. But we can argue about it then. But I have no lack of sustain above the 12th fret. But yeah, he might be talking about the neck pickup is moved closer to the bridge than on a Les Paul, so that harmonic node is in a different place. But I've not experienced that at all. Well, if you're happy with your Strat, that's great. Hey, Greg G. His AC15C1 cut out twice yesterday. It was after about 2 minutes of warm-up. It was only a microsecond cut out, but the sudden volume change is shocking. Is this most likely a bad connection? It could be a bad tube. Could be a bad connection. There's quite a few little multi-pin connectors in there. Power the amp off, unplug from the wall, all that stuff, and get some electronics cleaner or just some isopropyl alcohol, and one at a time, so you don't mix them up. Disconnect the little white headers from each other and spray a little cleaner in there and put them back a few times and put them back. It could be as simple as that. Make sure your input jacks are tight. If it does it more, let me know, but there's not a lot that will go wrong on that. There's stuff that can go wrong with any production amp. And on the Vox stuff, it is made to a price point. So the filter caps are not 12,000 hour Nishikons the way you see me put in, when I send amps out. But they're quite good and they're much better than what Fender's putting in the stuff that they sell for twice as much. But let me know what you run into. Howdy, Dr. Rockefeller. I believe the Supersonic 22, if it uses the tube reverb stage, and I think it does, and it's the same reverb tank that any of the Fender Historics use. If it's a solid state, it would use the same reverb tank that the Blues Junior, no, not Blues Junior, well, technically, yeah, the Blues Junior, the Blues DeVille and Hot Rod Deluxe and all that take. But the last Supersonic I had in was a 60, and I don't remember on the 22. I'm sorry. It's either going to be solid state or tube. If it's a tube, it's going to start. It's going to have an A in the designation. If it's a solid state, it's going to have an E in the designation for the tank. Hey, buddy with an H. I mentioned wanting to add value content for Patreon to make sense. Yeah, I would love a growing database of voltage charts to reference for individual amps. Forums are all over the place. Well, I am not the guy who documents things in charts like that. I have databases and spreadsheets that I've created for my use where it speeds up my work. And I've got notebooks that I scribble things in the heat of the battle, but I don't have a set of charts made for historical record because that's not how my mind works. I would start that with all the good intentions in the world of continuing to do that, and I wouldn't get around to it. I'd think, well, here are my notes on this amp. I'll type that up later. I'd be setting everyone up for disappointment. So I don't think that's a thing that I can do. I think Brad's Guitar Garage, he's a little, he seems so much more laid back than me. I think he's a little more on the ball, that kind of stuff. He might have all those charts because he writes down everything from all his repairs, all the little minutia. I tend not to unless it's critical to an owner's understanding of what the problem was. Lou likes the sag of a green Tortex pick. Yeah, well, there's something to that. I know you're halfway in jest. I've got a green Tortex around here somewhere. I've got tons of them around here somewhere. But I admire. Ask Zach Childs. He was recommending these little D'Andrea medium heavies. This is his favorite pick. So ordered a bag of a dozen. And I can't get a sound with them. They flap for me. I've tried the round in. I've tried the pointy in. I've tried choking up. They don't work for my hand geometry or whatever. And it's odd because we're about the same size. It's not like, we have the same meat hook hands. It doesn't work for me. But the things that do work for me are all over the place. I can use this little, this is a Prime Tone Jazz 3, and this is a Max Grip Red Nylon Jazz 3, and those work for me. And the little green 0.88 mil flows work for me. And this great big bare knuckles, like 1.3 millimeter tortoise works really well for me. But I can't use Zach's pick. Sorry, I thought it might make me play like him. It didn't. The purple's good too, the 1.4, I believe it is, or 1.14. Javon, hey, not your buddy. We don't talk to each other that way, okay? I'm just now seeing it. Wes is one of my moderators for a reason. He's here to help the stream be good for everyone. So when he says, hey, buddy, don't ask your question more than once and don't do it in all caps. If you ask your question more than once, it's hard for me to find the questions. And Wes can kick you out of the chat, and I will not argue with him. And Wes is not my only moderator. Brad's a moderator. Wes is a moderator. Matt's a moderator because I can't be there in real time because I'm always behind in the chat. But yeah, I'm not your buddy. We're not going to talk to each other that way. No one is going to talk to each other on my page like that. Hey, Alex, I got a Marshall Origin 20 that crackles for the first 5 minutes when it's warming up. Wants to replace a tube. Do I have to bias power tubes? Yeah, Origin 20, I believe, is cathode bias, so you would not need to bias those tubes. But If it's crackling for the first 5 minutes, it's more likely to be a solder joint than the tubes. It's possible it's the tubes, but the Origin series has got some really underwattage resistors here and there. So the solder joints can be stressed. Hey, John Cantrell, I'm sorry. I'm very busy. I would like to work on another one at some point. I have got so many amps ahead of it right now. I'm sorry. I was reading some drama that happened when I wasn't here. When I was sorry. Really harsh my buzz, guys. John Cantrell. I will look for your email, but it would be probably September before I could. I don't mean to be rude. Let's see. Andy Talamantes. Speaking of being busy, I've got a bunch of his amps here right now. Just acquired a 5X6A clone that was nicely built by Good Tech in Phoenix. It has a ground switch that, yeah. So he's repurposing the ground switch, selects 2 taps off the power transformer and changes voltages. So he's using 2 different primaries to get different outputs on the secondaries, or more likely changing 2 different selecting between 2 different secondaries. If it's implemented correctly, that'd be fine. That'd be able to give you different fields and voltages. I'd have to look at it to make sure it was done right, but it there's nothing inherently wrong or unsafe with it. Let's see, Adam Planch, 6G3 Deluxe. All right. Building a single channel version, which leaves me with an extra triode at V1. Any advice on doing it parallel? Yeah, you can play around with it. It's kind of like blending channels on a Marshall. You can do that. I don't personally see the point of doing that to a 6G3 Deluxe, because it will not be a 6G3 Deluxe at that point. It'll be something else. And it won't. I would say first build it as a 6G3 Deluxe and see what you think, because that's a very, very classic amp and may do everything you ever wish. Then you can always temp in, just up in the air, some other stuff, and see if you prefer that. Get to know it in stock form before you're doing that stuff. But yeah, you can. I'm trying to think of amps that do that. I'm trying to think of what the amps are that do that. Anyway, that's a little bit hard to get into here because I don't have diagrams for you. But you can say, all right, I'm going to treat the low end this way and the high end this way. So everything above 700 hertz is going to have more distortion than everything below 700 hertz. But it gets complicated, and sometimes you end up chasing your tail. Thanks, Guitars and Amps Rock, appreciate that. Could I recommend an electronics tech that could go through your tube tester, tuned up? Respectfully, James. Where are you located, James? A lot of the older guys could do it, but I'd have to know where you're located. In the Florida Panhandle. Brad, are you still here? Can you look up in our database and see anyone in around Florida, Georgia, Alabama line who could help James out there? Brad and I have access to the same list of techs that we can recommend, but I don't have that up while I'm doing this. Sorry. What's the screen name? Hi, Lyle. Hi, what's the screen name? What's my take on the plug-and-play tube solid-state rectifiers? They're not going to affect the heater circuit at all. But I'm not. The heater is a totally separate thing from a tube versus solid-state rectification. The heater is going to stay the same. You might have a fluctuation of less than a tenth of a volt, depending on what the tube's doing, but not too much. So I'm not sure how to answer your question. Maybe I'm misunderstanding your intent. Hey, D. Yamariv. Well, the 5E3 and the Tweed Twin and the Tweed Bassman are very, very different amps. There's not a Tweed sound. 5E3 is a cathode biased amp using a pair of 6V6s, and it has a fairly tiny output transformer, and it's got a very primitive tone circuit, more bright or less bright. And kind of very interactive channels. The Tweed Twin and the Tweed Bassman have a much more responsive tone stack. They have much more independent channels. They have a lot more output, fixed bias, much larger transformers into a choice of a 2x12 or a 4x10 cabinet as opposed to the 1x12 with the Deluxe. And even between the Twin and the Bassman, which can be almost exactly the same circuit with a few little variations due to impedances and such, just the different speaker cabs make them sound very different. But if you've built a 5E3 Deluxe, it is not interchangeable with the other two. So listen to a bunch. Play some if you can. I'm about to feature the restored 58 Bassman on the channel, and it sounds nothing like a 5E3. Let's see. Can I talk about Odge UK? Can I please talk a bit about why FX loops don't work in plexi topology amps with regards to solo volume boost and or effects? The zero loss Metro amp FX loop seems to work well. All right. I understand all sides of this argument. You can put an effects loop in a plexi right before the phase inverter. The issue is if you are really using the amp as it was designed, you're not going to get the results a lot of people expect from an effects loop, in that there is distortion added to whatever signal is feeding the input of the phase inverter. The phase inverter distorts, the output tubes distort. To a degree, the output transformer distorts. To a degree, the speakers distort. So if you want the sound of a Marshall recorded in a studio that then has a big Lexicon hall reverb added to it, and it's just pristine stereo spread, and that will not happen if you feed that same Lexicon reverb into the phase inverter of that Marshall. That does not mean an effects loop is useless. It means that you will be coloring everything that you use in the loop more than you might think. And if you use a boost, if you're actually boosting the signal going into the phase inverter, then you're going to have to boost an awful lot to get the desired dB difference, because a lot of what you boost will get distorted, it'll get saturated, and so you won't be able to cleanly boost into the phase inverter because you're going to get more distortion, and it's going to be output distortion. It's going to be a little bit harsh. The other way you can do this is you can have your boost be unattenuated and your normal level be attenuated. So when it's set, the foot switch says boost, but you're really unattenuating, and your normal is really turned down, in which case everything cleans up. Your normal sound will be clean. So I used to build a device called that, for that purpose, called the Limos. But it was not designed for a Marshall effects loop. It was designed for something like the Sur PT100, where you have this big, really clean output section, and the preamp had all the distortion. And you can do this in a lot of amps, like a Soldano, where the pre is got all the saturation and distortion, but the output section's got 4 6L6s and it's running very clean. It's really hard to distort that. And that's when the effects loop can work more effectively. The way I explain it to people is, do you want to put the amp in the cathedral or the cathedral in the amp? Because they sound totally different. But it will work. And if you have the Metro loop in a plexi, it will work, but it's not going to be as clean as if you record the output, put a mic on the speaker or the load out of the aux box or whatever you're doing, the final result after the output transformer. And they say it's a speaker with a microphone. Then you apply all the effects to that microphone. That will be an accurate representation of what that source was. Whereas if you have at the effects loop, here's the signal feeding the effects loop, here's the effects loop output, and here's the phase inverter, that is going to degrade or change. It's going to alter the effect itself. You may like that. It may become the core of your sound. But people think that it's just perfect, and it's not. Hey, Clyde, 70s Bassman, 50 master volume. Your tech says he can't find a schematic for that model. Asked another tech, couldn't find either. If we can't find, what would be the next step? I don't know your tech. I don't know the other tech, and I'm not trying to talk out of school. But you shouldn't need a schematic to fix a 70s Bassman. It's 99% the same as every other Bassman or every other AB763 amp. It's real simple. It doesn't even have reverb or tremolo. I don't want to talk out of school, and I don't know that what you said. I'm not saying that you're misrepresenting what someone said. I'm not saying that you're lying, but I don't know whether that was really. I know that's what you took away from what your tech said. That I'm trying not to shit talk other techs out of school that I don't know, but in general, my view is that if a tech cannot trace out what's happening in a Bassman 50 in about 5 minutes, you need to find a different tech, because that's like amp 101. Wah wah, I'm the bad guy again. Welcome to my internet. Edge of Eternity 101 is their version of building a current limiter that I recommend. Well, there are a lot of current limiters out there, and there are some very expensive ones, and they're great. And while you can still get incandescent bulbs, I love and I use a light bulb limiter because it does a very good thing. You need a 300 watt and 150 watt, pretty much, cover up most of your bases. And all it is you are running the light bulb in series on the hot of one side. So here's your hot, and it goes through a switch, which feeds it to a bulb. The other side of the bulb goes to the output of a receptacle, and the neutral of the receptacle just goes to the input neutral, and ground is separate. So when you plug something into the receptacle, the hot has to go through that bulb, and you can wire the switch to bypass the bulb, so then it's just a regular outlet. But the hot has to go through that bulb to flow, and if normal operation of that amp, there's barely going to be much amperage being drawn through that bulb. The bulb's barely going to light up at all. But if there's a short condition, that amp will try to draw a lot of current, and at that point, most of I'm just going to cheat and say most of the electricity is going to be converted into light, and you'll have a bright bulb, which means that all that electricity that's being turned into light can't fry your amp. The amp is just acting as a big hard on switch for the bulb instead of an actual dead short, which is going to fry things. Now, that said, doesn't mean that, oh, now I have a pretty lamp, let's just run that. It means, oh, turn things off, because eventually the amp can still die under that condition. But it'll keep a fuse from blowing, typically. It'll keep something from getting further damage, typically, and gives you a pretty good indication. So if the amp is healthy, you turn it on, there's a slight orange burst at the beginning, and then it settles to either nothing or the very dimmest of things. And if you have a great big amp, use a 300-watt bulb. If you have a very regular amp, use a 150-watt bulb. And stock up on the bulbs while you can get them. We are at the first hour, and I think we're going to take our first break. Let's do Echo's comment here first, because super chat. Thank you, Echo. Uses a quad of power tubes in my amps, and I'm sick of them not being well matched by vendors. Can I use a small trim pot on each socket to bias them exactly the same? Cheers from Sweden. You can install individual biases per tube or per side. It gets very, very complicated. The first thing you need to do is you need to be sure if you need to, because you can, unless you're having a tube start to red plate, or unless you're having hum because you don't have any common mode cancellation, you may not need to have perfectly matched tubes. Second of all, you don't have to have, this is just true in general, you don't have to have 4 identically matched tubes. What you need to have is the same current draw on your push pair or your push tubes, individual or push, or individual or pair, or 3 if it's a like a Ampeg SVT, and your pull set. So here's my push set, here's my pull set. So let's say I've got one tube measures 19, one tube measures 24, so that's 43 for that side. If the next one measures 21 and 22, none of those tubes match each other, but I've got 43 per side, 43 per side. That will work as a matched quad. So first of all, make sure that you really need that stuff. Second of all, is implementing the fix going to introduce more problems than were there before? Because every time you have a new bias supply, it's a new opportunity for something to go catastrophically wrong. Third of all, will you hear a difference? But it's possible that you're getting just really poor matches from vendors. That does happen, and you can, in which case, also find other vendors. I understand that not all parts of the world have equal access, and I'm sorry about that. So we're going to do first of 2 intermissions. For those new to the channel, it's going to take about 7 minutes, and I will see you all back in 7. Amazingly, if my phone is accurate, we only have a 5-second lag between when I send this stuff out into the ether and when you guys receive it. That's pretty good. Let's see. With wall voltages that vary pretty widely, do you think it's a good idea to invest in a regulator or a conditioner to keep the amp in the preferred sweet spot? It can be tricky to do that. One of the good options, if you're just using one amp at a time and it, 5 amps or less, there is a thing sold for computers called an uninterruptible power supply. And there are some of those that you can set to 110 or you can set to 120. And that can be very nice for those with older amps. It's a cheap version of a Variac if 110 floats your boat, or you can just set it to 120. And what it does is if the voltage goes over 120, that voltage charges the battery. And because it has a big battery in it, if the voltage drops below 120, it puts it back to 120. And it's not entirely accurate, but within a volt or two, it stays about 120. And that's a good option for a lot of people. And I think they're about like $80. Yeah, you want to get a good brand, and you want to make sure that it can handle the current draw of the amplifier in question. Then there are Variacs, but a Variac will not follow what's coming out of the wall, because if the wall fluctuates, if you have 123 volts coming out of the wall and you turn the Variac to 117, if the wall voltage goes up, so does what comes out of the Variac. If the wall voltage goes down, so does what's coming out of the Variac. The Variac sets things relative to whatever's coming in. So does a brown box. Maybe the perfect solution would be a big uninterruptible power supply to always give a steady 120, and then a Variac after that to say, and then we're going to always have 117 or whatever you need to do. But there are very expensive solutions that are much better than the simple uninterrupted power supply. And if you're going out on tour with AC/DC, they have that stuff, and they're like, hey, we are always going to have 233 volts, 50 hertz, no matter where we are in the world. But that is a $10,000 plus investment. So the power supply, maybe in conjunction with for $200 you could have the uninterruptible power supply and one of the 5 amp made in China Variacs, and have a pretty good rig for an amp, maybe 2 at a time. If you have a Deluxe and a Princeton, maybe you use 2 at once, but that won't do a wall of Marshalls. You'd have to have individual ones. All you need is cash. And you have to donate an infinite amount for me to discuss whether the universe is actually designed for us to solve these problems. But it is nice when all these things just line up, and everyone has been talking about Tweed disease for all these years and putting zip ties and things and putting amps in ovens. I'm like, a $3 bottle of isopropyl from Walgreens and a hairdryer will fix this? A little bit more than that, but not much. I do remove the old solder and heat things up, but it does all even out, and it's not that difficult. Have I ever built with 6 BM8s in push-pull and used their triodes for the phase inverter? I have not built with them. I've had an amp which had them, and I don't recall which amp that was. It was interesting. No, wait, it wasn't a 6 BM8, but no, I've got a. It's going to be finished up soon. I've got that Gibson EH 125 or 150, EH 150 from 1936. I finally got all the speaker reconed and the replacement transformer for that. And that uses a triode pentode dual tube. That's what I'm thinking of. But no, I've not built with it. That is push-pull, though. I'm not using any color filters. My head color is peachy, but not my hand. They should be more or less the same color. If I bring my hand closer to the light, Go to the light, Carol Hand. Carol Hand. I just named my hand Carol. Well, can't complain. It got me through high school. Let's see. Thanks very much, Krister Westland. No question. You certainly get to ask some questions. Those darn highlights, yeah. Takes forever to get it just perfect like this. I do AV and shade cameras for a living. It's not terrible. Thank you. Not terrible is the best I can hope for. Let's see. Hey, Bottom Kitchen, on a 60s AC30 with voltage selector pin, is it as simple as changing to 115 volts, or is there more to it? Any videos on the topic? I don't trust the voltage selector with the pins, so what I'll do is I will disconnect the center wire from that, which is what feeds the rest of it, and then I'll just move it to whichever tap is I'll find which pin is the one that would be in use at 115 volts. That's the one going to the power transformer, and I will move the center wire to that same point. So it's hardwired for 115. If I were doing it for someone in the UK, I'd hardwire it to 230 or 240, whatever, because that pin is not reliable after 60 years. Same for the impedance selector and voltage selector on old Marshalls. Let's see. Meryl, contact me. I'm no longer doing work through Martin Music. I just have too much, and I'm trying to be selective, but your amp certainly would qualify. So shoot me an email, info@sonicaudio.com. I'll look for that, but I'll be glad to do a 66 AC30 and a 66 Bassman and AA864, the output for you. I'm glad to. Hey, Jeremy Ross. I'm afraid I don't like the Pro Junior. They have the same problems as the other Hot Rod series and Blue series, but then they have their own worse problems. With the pots are truly terrible, and break, and the entire thing is built even more cheaply than the Blues Junior. I cannot recommend the Pro Junior for that money. I would much rather have someone just have a Katana that is exactly as described, rather than saying Pro on it. There's nothing Pro about the Pro Junior. Also, they sound really boxy. It's a shame. The core circuit run through a different speaker can sound quite nice, but they just don't last. Hey, Daniel Ramirez, I do not know. He's got a Princeton 65 reissue and a Rivera Tweed Deluxe, great tone. Is it worth selling both to buy a Headstrong Lil King? I don't know. I have heard very good things about the Headstrong amps, primarily from Zach Childs from AskZach.com, and JD Simo, and I believe that Tom Bukovac is also using one. And so I hope that the insides are fantastic, but I have not had one on the bench. I have not heard one in person. I hope that they're well built. One person commented that he had been inside one and found a lot of beginner mistakes in them, but he does not know whether that was a very early one. Hopefully they fixed all that, but that was, what I'm telling you is apocryphal. So until I have seen the inside of one, and I would love to. So if anyone watching this knows anyone at Headstrong, and Headstrong is confident in their products and their build, and they want to send one to me to share with everyone how it's built, I'd be glad to. I don't just shit on amps for a living. I've had great things to say about a lot of companies on here. Swart, Friedman, Sir, Germino, Top Hat. I would love to be able to add the Headstrong to that official list of things I can completely recommend. Until I have that knowledge, I cannot tell you that you should trade the other things for you. You know the weaknesses of the Princeton 65, but those are fairly easily addressed, and it is a very good sounding amp. I have no experience with the Rivera amps. I hope they're great, so I cannot fully answer your question. But if someone from Headstrong wants to reach out to me, and you know you make the best damn amp possible, send it here, and I'll tell everyone they make the best damn amp possible, or otherwise, because it would not be a paid review. You'd be getting the amp back, and I would not charge you any money for that review. But that also means that I would have the complete freedom to say whatever I find is the truth. Let's see. Thank you, Walter. I can't think about the channel like that because I don't know, it just, I do what I do, and most of the time I'm a crazy guy talking to himself in a room as he works on amps, and then you guys seem to like listening back to the crazy man talk about amps. And here, twice a month, you get to hear the crazy guy talk about amps in real time. Beyond that, I cannot think about being an important YouTube channel. I am such an important YouTube channel. And if you go to Kroger and say, hey, I want this for free because I'm an important YouTube channel, they'll look at you like you're nuts. So I can't. I appreciate the implied compliment, but I can't think in terms of that kind of stuff. Riffs and Rhythm. What speaker would I put in a Fender Deluxe Reverb Tone Master? Neo Creamback or Neo V-Type or Neo Jensen? Of those three, I have heard the Neo Jensen's, the Neo 12K, and I've heard the Neo Creamback. And I thought that the Neo 12K was an amazing replica of the standard C12K in that it completely sounded like ass, just like it's the full version does. The regular C12K sounds terrible, and the Neo C12K sounds terrible and weighs a third as much. The Creamback I thought actually sounded quite nice. It's a bit of a bright speaker, but not unpleasantly so, and you can, if I really needed to save weight, I could learn to love and work around the brightness of the Neo Creamback. But I have not heard any Neo speakers from any brand that really sound fantastic compared to their larger, heavier brethren. Of the ones I have heard, which is granted a small sample size, the Creamback is the least objectionable one I've heard so far. That's my ringing endorsement. Hey, buddy with an H. Something's different about your 6G3, but I'd have to see pictures of it. But there's nothing. Hey, if you're at a place where it works and it's quiet, you're at the right place. That's great. Yeah, a Hiwatt would be great in 76 New Sumila. Hiwatt from 76 though is going to be one of the, a lot more expensive than a 76 Twin, and probably more expensive than a 76 Marshall. But if he's really feeling that birthday year urge and he wants something special, yeah, get you a 76 DR103 and be very, very happy. Hey, Brad, Victorias are good. They're built a lot like the Vox Custom Series, only in a smaller footprint, so everything's layered on top of each other. If you've been inside a, what's it called? A Koch. Is it Koch amps? Koch amps, Koch amps. The build quality of those is very similar. Some of the orange stuff is built very similarly to the Victoria stuff. Not Victoria. Sorry, I was thinking Victory. Sorry, I was talking about Victory amps. Victoria amps are good. They're Tweed Fender copies. They copy some of the things which are technically mistakes. But they're easily undone. But yeah, Victoria makes good Tweed Fender copies. Better than Fender makes these days. Sorry, I've got the real-time text enlarged because I can enlarge the real-time text. So if someone comments and I see it in real time, it's easy to read. If I have everything that I'm responding to here, and if I make it big enough that I can see it very easily, I can't see as many things at once. It's harder to navigate. I get lost scrolling up and down. So occasionally I will misread things because I'm 3 feet away and I need new glasses. Hey, Alex, 2112. He's loving his Deluxe Reverb reissue. Any suggestions what you can do with the ground switch on the back? Odds are the ground switch is disconnected anyway, and it's certainly useless in that amp. I wouldn't change it. You can do a negative feedback lift. It's not as useful as people think, but you know, if it floats your boat, do that. There's not much else to do with it without intrinsically changing the nature of the amp. You don't want to put a master volume there. You don't want to put a mid spot there because you'd be running audio signal over by the AC main stuff. But you could do a negative feedback switch with that thing. A lot of the Deluxe reissues that have that 3-position switch, it's a dummy switch. It's not attached to anything inside. It's just there for cosmetics. They wasted an $8 switch for cosmetics. Hey, Martin. No, I've had no dealings with Rift amps. I've seen some of his videos. He seems to really know what he's talking about. And I like the work that he's demonstrated, but I've not had I have no experience with his actual amps. I hope they're fantastic. They look like they ought to be very well built, and he knows his stuff. So, and it's interesting that Martin and Wes both asked the same kind of question at the same time. Yeah. So anyone who likes my channel, anyone who likes Brad's channel, would probably also like Rift amps, and I hope he likes my stuff because hopefully I just sent a bunch of stuff to check him out. A bunch of people have said him. Let's see. All right, Postamo, Princeton, 1956. Amp techs have debated the speaker impedance since I got this amp in the 1990s. What do you suggest? Seems to be a transitional 5F2A circuit with a triad 50-265 output transformer with 40-to-1 turns ratio. I would, if I had that amp here, I would do a bunch of math at this point, and I would make the determination myself. But I am not set up. I can't do that math in my head. And I'm not going to stop in the middle of a stream and call up all that stuff because I have to say, and what did you measure this? What was this measurement? And you may not have all that information. The turns ratio is part of it. So if I had your amp, I could answer that decisively. If I had all the numbers and I could get back to you in a few hours later, I'd be able to answer that. But the short answer is it won't hurt. It won't hurt to run at 4 or 8. And a lot of times the Princeton and Champs, which use the same transformers for a big chunk of their lives, had a mismatched primary anyway, because Leo was trying to make them last a long time for reasons too long to get into. So let's say that it is nominally a 4-ohm speaker. You may prefer the sound it is nominally a 4-ohm load. You may actually prefer the sound of that amp with an 8-ohm speaker connected to the 4-ohm tap because it's going to push the primary impedance to a happier place for the tube. Both are safe ways to run that. You could run that with a 2-ohm, a 4-ohm, or an 8-ohm speaker. If you're set up to do that as a test, see which one you like the sound of. That's the real answer. It won't hurt a damn thing. Hey, Nick Cap, I have no experience of Savage audio amps. Sorry, so therefore no opinion. Port City, are they the ones who did the Pearl, Elias? I had one of those, and it was really poorly built. Which was a shame. It was really pretty on the outside, but I don't remember specifics enough to say, and it was this, and this, but the overall, my overall memory of the amp is that it was very poorly built, kind of like kit build quality with a couple of mistakes in it that I had to clean up. That were, to my mind, beginner mistakes, but I don't remember what they were precisely. Ted's got a good point, though I'm not sure about that. 4-ohm speakers are very rare in 56. I believe a lot of champs use 4-ohm speakers, and or 3.6 ohms, whatever, same thing. But I could be wrong because I may be remembering from later. I'm not arguing with Ted on this. Every time I get an amp in before 58, I've got to do a little bit of research because there's a Fender was all over the map until they kind of figured things out. Ted says I stand correct. Ted, well, I'm not correcting you, Ted. If you're correct about 56, and you very well may be, that's a good point. And Fixer Kanji, what mic am I using? SM57. I didn't want to get the SM7B. One of us, crusty jugglers. I'm a rebel, man. I'll stick with my 57. Let's see here. Yeah, people talking to Yeatsy about his Astron experience. That's the lesson we all learn for ourselves. Let's see. Elias Theory, I have no experience with the new MiG-50. The old ones were pretty good sounding. Actually, some of them were excellent sounding copies of old Marshall designs. They're the ones I've always played were either 2204s or 1987s. The trouble is the old ones were made with Soviet military surplus parts. They used very non-standard sizes and mounting methods that were not really fixable. And the new one is a clone of a Marshall. So I'm not sure why they exist, but apparently there's some marketing niche that they are taking advantage of. Riffs and Rhythm, you asked about the Tone Master speaker a second time, and I'm not singling you out, and I'm not criticizing you. I don't know why I put things in the description. Only about 1 out of 10 people seem to read them. Please ask questions once. I will get to them. But I get to them. I try to answer them in the order that they're asked. And I do appreciate, like here, when people put the question marks in front of the questions, because it helps it stand out, whereas 2 preamps you recommend, as I'm scrolling down, looks like any comment where people are commenting on each other's comments, which is great. I love that you guys do that. The conversations you have with each other are just as important as anything that I'm giving back to you. But it's hard for me to see. It's hard for me to see the questions. 2 preamps I recommend, Daniela. It's really difficult these days because a lot of the companies are not great, or companies that were great 6 months ago are having a bad batch, and the company that I was having problems with 6 months ago suddenly is doing very well. In general, for clients' amps right now, with the current supply and what my vendors have, I'm using Electro Harmonic 7025s as much as possible. If an amp has a tremolo circuit, like say it's a Deluxe Reverb, I'll order a JJ ECC 83 for the trem tube and save the owner like $10 on a tube that's not in the audio path. For 12 AT7s, my preference is in an amp that's where a real player is going to have it. There's some JANs that are still on the market for about $30 that are much better than anything made. The same thing for if I need a 5Y3, but that's not a preamp tube. But if a client's budget doesn't allow all that stuff, I'll happily use all JJ. I just test them, and I let the owner know that, hey, JJ has seemingly had some problems with the glass in the last couple of years, and sometimes they prematurely lose vacuum. But I'm buying from, in most cases for that kind of thing, the Tube Depot, and they've got this. Here's their warranty, and if something happens within that period, we can change it out. And odds are all 3 of them won't go bad. If one of them goes bad 6 months from now and loses vacuum, well, you're out $20. Sorry. And it's a calculated risk, but I let the owners know so they can make the decision themselves. Let's see, reverb mod for 410 DeVille and speaker upgrade. I already have a mod tank installed. Speaker upgrade, 410 DeVille. The speaker upgrade is that's a tough one on all fronts. The THEF 29. Because 4 10-inch speakers is going to be $200 to $300 typically, and I don't think it's worth putting that into a Hot Rod DeVille or Blues DeVille because the amp itself wants to catch on fire, and is already toasting itself. Even if the DeVilles aren't as bad as the Deluxes, but still, even if it's working fine for you, the low voltage supply is cooking itself, and you will eventually need to spend $200 to $300 to keep it going. So my honest advice to anyone who owns one of those, where the amp is still working, sell it to some other poor unsuspecting sucker while it's still working, so that you aren't the one who has to pay that $300 to fix the factory alliteration that would have cost Fender about $7 to fix. So I think it's a very poorly designed amp. I think it's insulting to keep that product on the market for approaching 40 years without fixing the very well-known, glaringly obvious flaws that are easily, inexpensively remedied at the manufacturing level, but cost owners $200 to $300 to fix when they are fixable, because sometimes the boards burn too bad and then the owner's SOL. So I would not personally put $200 to $300 worth of speakers in an amp that I'm probably going to need to put $200 to $300 worth of labor into to keep going within the next 5 years. And the reverb mod, there are little things you can do. It's not a great sounding circuit, and there aren't a lot of tanks available that work with that. So, well, THEF 29, he says it's a 96 and your amp tech went through it a year ago. He's good. That's great. Go ask him about the thing, but I can't recommend that anyone put money into a DeVille because they're garbage amps and they have serious flaws. And if you don't believe me, fine. That's great. I can only tell you what I think. I'm not saying you're stupid for liking it. I'm not saying that it can't sound good, but there are so many things that sound better that don't have this serious issues. So, what do I think of Matchless HC30s? They are very heavy, overbuilt, way biased too hot Vox copies. They're not easy to maintain. They can sound great, but they kill their tubes. They kill their plastics, by which I mean the chassis gets so hot that the front and back panels warp and break. I think in 1987, when those things hit the market, they were so much better than what Fender and Marshall were making that people were like, oh my God, have you heard this new Matchless thing? And it is really a good sounding amp. And it is so much better than what was being made in the mid-'80s by the big companies. But it is not a perfect amp. And I think it's a little bit overhyped. It certainly has severe heat issues, and you can see the Matchless videos on my channel. And they have no business designing and selling pedals. You can also see those videos on my channel. So they're good, but they're not as good as people make them out to be, and they're not particularly innovative. Hey, Christopher Sambuco. Filter cap question, F&T versus MOD. Depends. There are some values that MOD doesn't make that F&T does. There are some values that MOD offers that F&T doesn't. Like if you wanted to have all MODs, you can get 25 microfarad, 25 or 50 volt caps. If you want to have F&Ts for your cathodes, you got to have those giant dual sections that are ridiculous and very expensive and barely fit. F&Ts are rated for 85 degrees. MODs are rated for 105 degrees Celsius. So on a heat level, they're going to last longer. They have similar tolerances for my measurements, both in terms of ESR, in terms of actual capacitance. The MODs are physically a little bit smaller, I think the F&Ts look better. I happily use both, and I also love my Vichets. Have you seen in a lot of amps? I tend to use these for cathodes and bias stuff, and it's like on the 10 microfarad 450 volt. There's a Vichet right there. Isn't that pretty? See the thumbnail. Ooh, we're all experiencing the thumbnail. I won't use most Illinois caps. There are certain series that they make that are quite good, but I approach them with caution. Kemet, I will still use a couple of Kemets when they're available. They're not always available. They seem to be discontinued. Nishikons used to be great. They're completely out of the axial game. There just aren't a lot of axial electrolytics out there. All amps being made today should be made with radials from a manufacturing perspective. It's just the way it is. But, for some reason, guitarists hear with their eyes, and so axial looks cooler, something like that, or people are convinced that radials look like something out of a damn computer, Hey, Dennis Flock. Yeah, Swartz are great. I've got some videos up on some Swartz bass tones here, and a couple weeks ago I did a live stream with Keith Williams at 5 Watt World recommending amps for home use, and the Swart Atomic Space Tone and Space Tone Junior certainly made my list. I think they're great. Hey Tyler, what's my opinion on Ceriatone amps quality-wise? Mixed bag. The board and the components and the pots and the wiring job tend to be fantastic. The orange Ceriatone labeled caps, I don't know what's underneath that plastic shrink wrap, so I don't know whether they're good caps or bad caps. The IEC connectors and the fuse holders tend to be made of really brittle, cheap plastic that breaks if you look at it twice. Some of the switches seem to be not of great quality. Other Ceratones have had NKK and CK, good stuff that I know is good, and some of it's just been generic. The transformers worry me. I've not had a failure with any of them. Some techs I know have reported failures for those transformers. They look extremely generic. They look extremely inexpensive, and they have very hard, sharp corners, as if just sharper corners than a Hammond box like this. So just stamped metal folded somehow, as opposed to a very nice bell cover that you see in most things. So the transformers give the sense that they're very inexpensive. Are they just inexpensive, or are they also cheap in terms of poor quality? I don't know. Time will tell. So mixed bag. They have some really good stuff, and then they'll oddly will choose to do something so shoddy next to it. So I have a couple Ceriatones on the channel. Most of them I end up replacing couple of things just so that they will last for the owner. Sometimes they've arrived brand new out of the box with a shattered fuse holder. Let's see, Elias Theory, you've been asking the same questions. I've already answered those. Yeah, Ted, some amps run EL84s at 420 or more. They should, really max out about 350, 340. But, Brian May with his AC30s running those things at a measly 310, 320, no one's going to sound good with that low a plate voltage on the EL84. Let's see. Richard Clark, no news on the Excalibur yet. Sorry, I want to. I want to very much. I've got so many irons in the fire. Hey, Spawn, you just got a Tone King Gremlin, no coin-based tubes, and also no bear traps. Did see in a picture that one cap is close to a single ceramic resistor. Should I be worried about that cap? I would have to see it. May not be a problem at all. In general, some large ceramic, cement resistors, some get hot, some don't. Some are chosen to be big cement resistors because there's going to be heat on them. Others are chosen because, hey, I need to span from this trace to this trace. I use this 5-watt ceramic. It's only 50 cents, and it'll give me that span. We'll have to do a whole bunch of via stuff, and it'll handle, otherwise we need a 2-watt resistor. Might as well use a 5-watt. It'll never get hot. So I cannot second guess the Tone King Gremlin from this distance. I hope it is great. Hey, Jim B. Any opinions on the Supersonic, Fender's Supersonic 22 or 60 watt? Thank you very much, Jim B. I am afraid I have to tell you that neither amp is an amp I would ever recommend. They are extremely noisy. They have the same low voltage supply circuit used in the Hot Rod and Blues series that burns up the board, and every one that comes in has got, and the same cheap IC brand filter caps. So every Supersonic 60 or 22 that comes in, the filter caps are leaking, and there's always some burned area on the board where the 5-watt Zener diodes and the 5-watt resistors are. And once you do that, especially the 60, the effects loop implementation is extraordinarily noisy, and the reverb's noisy. And I can make the reverb quiet, but the real fix for that amp is to rebuild the low voltage supply, totally recap it, totally bypass the effects loop because it was implemented insanely. It's just so noisy. And at that point, you're still left with an amp that you have a choice between what? Vibro Verb and Tweed something, there's a push button on the front. And if you turn the tone stack so that one sounds good, the other one sounds bad, so then you change it so that the new one sounds good, then you go back, the other one sounds bad. It's promising an awful lot. No, this newer Supersonic 22 hasn't fixed that. I would not waste your money on them. Just buy something good. There's so many amp companies out there making better stuff than Fender makes these days. The only amps that Fender makes that are worth anything are the 65 reissue series, and I'll add in the 68 Pro Reverb that they have, though it's not really a Pro Reverb. I'll even be nice and add in the 68 VibroChamp Reverb reissue, which is not a reissue because there never was a VibroChamp with reverb. But those amps are all fine, and they all have little problems that can be addressed, and a lot of times they need new speakers. But those are the only ones that I think are even defensible. The Supersonic series, the Blues series, the DeVille series. Oh my God, I could do an entire video on that new Tone Master Bassman for $1,500. It's insane. Anyway, sorry if that's not the answer anyone is looking for. Hey, good, and I've got some Magnatones up on the channel. I've had a couple different models. One was the one with the Magnatone harmonic trem, and that's not a Magnatone circuit. What they've done is they've built one channel of a Deluxe Reverb, and they put the Magnatone trim in it. So it's not the old Magnatone circuit with the trim. It's a Deluxe pardon me. It is literally an AB763 reverb channel with that Magnatone trim instead of the AB763 trim. And it's pretty well built. It was built about as well as the Vox Custom series, or built about as well as the Friedman 20-watt series, the JJ Juniors and the Runts. And that's not bad at all. Both of those things are very well built, but it was priced like $1,000 more than the Friedman and $2,000 almost more than the, I guess, $1,500 more than the Vox. And that's when you're like, really Magnatone? The other Magnatone they had in, I don't want to name drop, but it was for a very professional guitarist, two of them you guys would recognize. And both of them, it's a cathode biased circuit that they have out. I can't remember which model it is. It's one of the 15-watters they have out there. And both EL84s were just toasted because they were running with 100 ohm screen grids and bias at like 19 watts. And I said, do you want this to sound real cool for a recording session and then it'll kill the tubes, or do you want to be able to go on the world tour you're about to go on? He chose that. I did the standard stuff to make EL84s work in the real world, and he was thrilled with it. And I heard back from the tour manager later that they lasted the entire tour. So I'm not sure how much design is happening at Magnatone. I think they hired someone to come up with the new special varistors to let them to have them made to their spec to be able to make the old Magnatone trim circuit. But I'm not seeing any Magnatone circuits in those amps. There's a third one I've had on the channel, and it was kind of okay. It's a Marshall kind of thing. Let's see. Hey, Jeremy Ross. I try not to think of the Eric Clapton chap. Is it even close to worth the cost? No, not at all. It's a bad version of a Tweed chap that Eric Clapton, his name is associated with, so it has a marketing bump. His more recent inanity about vaccines aside, let's just view him as a musician. He's accomplished a lot and deserves our respect for all that. He's also deaf as a post, and he doesn't use those damn things. Or if he uses one, he has a guy like me rebuild it right so it can go out on the road, and he makes the money off his whatever deal he strikes with Fender to sell something with as EC. Don't waste your money on that. Hey, Octavian D, thank you very much. Is there a way to objectively tell if a speaker is nearing end of life before it blows? I have a 1966 Pro Reverb with original speakers. Yeah, it rarely fully blows unless you play a 100-watt Marshall into a 25-watt speaker. Then it'll fully blow. Usually you'll get damage to the voice coil before the voice coil shorts, or you'll get just a worn-out cone. And typically you'll hear that as it'll start as a distorted low end, where the low notes are distorted, the rest of it sounds okay, and then eventually you just won't have any low end, but you'll still have upper mids and highs, though they'll start to sound kind of ratty, or you'll have a tear in the speaker, in which case there's always a distortion across all frequencies. So the best way to educate yourself is to have one set of new speakers for reference and say, how did the old speaker sound as new speaker sound? Because if you're hearing an amp and there's a little bit of distortion on the low frequency, you don't always know whether that's in the speaker or the actual signal coming out of the amp. You could have something else happening in the amp. But if you run that amp into another set of speakers and all of a sudden all the low end is full and clean and those issues are gone, then you know it's the other speakers. There are other ways to do it with sweep generators and stuff, but that's beyond what most people can or are willing to do. Thanks, Chris. I appreciate that. That's very nice. That's very kind of you. Not necessary, but always appreciated. Edge of Eternity, what kind of cleaner or lube do I use? Well, that's a very personal question. The can of acetone's out on the front porch because I was cleaning some paintbrushes. Not acetone, sorry. Acetone's for something. Actually, the can of acetone is on the front porch. I was thinking of also out there is the can of naphtha. So pretend I have naphtha and acetone. Acetone I use when I want to get something entirely clean, really fast, typically a metal thing, and there is no plastic involved, no rubber grommets, no plastics, because that stuff does not like acetone. So if I have a bare metal chassis that I need to get all oils off of, acetone does a great job of that. The next level up I will use will be naphtha, which is more gentle and then acetone. And especially if there's any sticky residue on a metal or whatever, it's great. It's better than Goo Gone, though you have to be more patient. If there's any rust, I like WD-40. That's primarily for steel surfaces. I don't get it on plastics. I don't use it in pots. I don't use it in tube sockets. I don't get it on rubber grommets. I don't get it on the wire. If I do get it on the wire, by mistake, my next solvent, the isopropyl alcohol, will drive this out of a wire, but I'm careful not to soak stuff with this. Isopropyl alcohol is my number one go-to for everything because it does no harm, though it can dry out some old plastics like rubber grommets in a chassis. Usually by the time they're dried out enough for this to finish them off, they need to be replaced anyway, and they're really cheap. So I replace a lot of grommets and things regardless of using isopropyl. This is great for cleaning wires. It's great for cleaning tube sockets. It's great for cleaning the boards, as you've seen. I don't use it in pots. I'll use it on the outside of pots, but I'm careful not to pour it onto the inside of the pot. I will usually just use F5 Feder lubricant and cleaner for the inside of pots. And this thing I can choose how much spray. I've got it set low. It has low, medium, high. I have it set very low. Same thing for the deoxit can. So I'm dispensing a very small amount at once, no matter what you may hear in the video where it may sound like shh, it's just barely anything. So my start is this, because this will clean a pot and it lubricates at the same time. Sometimes I'll have a pot that needs a little more, in which case I'll use a little bit of the deoxit, which will get rid of actual tarnishing on any surfaces. And once that's dried for a while, and I'll turn a pot and turn a pot and turn a pot and leave it like halfway, and then rotate it again about 10 minutes later. Make sure it doesn't, all the sediment that you've loosened doesn't end up bunched up on the wiper somewhere. Then after that, I'll do the Feder lube again after that. Tube sockets, I will usually just use isopropyl. Sometimes I use isopropyl. If that doesn't do it, I will then spray deoxit, and I'll take a separate tube and go in and out, a tube with clean pins, and I'll go in and out of the socket and make sure that the deoxit is really making contact with all that. And then I'll flush all the deoxit out with more isopropyl, because this stuff drives out the other stuff, then it evaporates. And that's my primer for cleaning stuff. There's other stuff I use in extreme situations. Like a Vaporust. I've got a big 2-gallon thing of a Vaporust. And I've got a big Tupperware thing that'll hold an entire Super Reverb chassis to soak in the Vaporust, as you guys have seen. I hope never to have to use that again, but I sure as hell could. That's a big, long answer to a pretty simple question. And when it comes to comes up to the next break, so we're going to talk about Brad's comment first. Everyone's talking about SG sustain, so it tells me I'm never going to catch up with the live stream, though we'll try in the next hour. Lack of sustain above the 2nd fret, and I think it means 12th fret, often means the pickups are set too close to the string. And I agree with him. It can be that, and it can also be just that in whatever key you're playing, because of where the pickup is, it's under a harmonic node, which is affecting that key more than others. But you're going to have that same issue on a Les Paul, just in a different key. But that should be minor. But well, I got the amp down, but I have not had any lack of sustain with this up top compared to the Les Paul that I used to have, and compared to the SG, not the SG, this is the SG, the 335 that I have, and compared to the, I guess, almost comparable Thornbucker, Sir Thornbucker in the Strat. And if you want to hear this being really, really played, one of the first videos I put up on the channel when I got that, Steve Selvage sat out there in the living room and played that brand new stock at the time SG compared to his historic 335, which is pretty much identical to the 335 I have now, through an old 62 AC 15 and a restored, I think it was a 76 Marshall, it might have been 74. And that's just guitar straight in. So if you're really curious about what an SG can sound like compared to another Gibson, Steve Selvage, SG 335, 2 great amps, straight in, no chaser. The SG held up very, very well. On that note, let me set my watch indicator, and we're going to go to another 7-minute intermission. I'll see you guys back at the end, if I can remember which button to push. As always, in the third hour, I've got more questions to answer than is possible, and I apologize. I will try to get to as many as I can. No super chats will be missed, but it pays to get here and ask a question earlier in the stream. But, I do 3 hours, which is more than most. Anyway, after this chat, what I'm going to be doing is I've got some boxes, little boxes on the hillside made of ticky-tacky. And they're all looking just the same right now, but they won't when I'm done. And I've got my drilling templates to do some pedal board fun stuff. Let's see. This is a different box. This is this one. This is gonna be, where am I? This is gonna be my interface, which will give me an input, a DC through, and a send and return through, and an expression through. And this will all go on the bottom. That's why I've got these mounting holes. So this goes on the pedal board itself, and this goes on the box. So this gets screwed in place because this is tall enough and the gap beneath the board is small enough that there's not room for dual locks. So 4 screws ought to do it. And this is going to be what one of these becomes when it grows up. I've got 3 pedals built. I've got a clone, which I don't care for. Then I'm going to play around with some circuit mods to see if I can make the clone less nasally and more of a general purpose useful thing for me. I'm glad I didn't spend $5,000. I've got a big muff that I built that sounds great, sounds just like a big muff. And ironically, the big muff that's in the HX Stomp sounds exactly interchangeable. I mean, it's phenomenal how good many of the overdrives in there are. The Prince of Tone thing in that is phenomenal. I'll be using that a lot. And the remaining one, with the one that I'm putting into this prettier box, is a Zen drive, though I'm making some mods to it to make it do more what I want it to do. And the reason I'm having that Zen drive there, and I have a buffered tuner, I've got the little polytune, and the ability, or I will have once I finish this box, to totally bypass the HX Stomp, is so when guest players come over and I bring my pedal board out, most of the time they're going to want a tuner, maybe a volume pedal, and an overdrive pedal that they can figure out real fast. And they don't have to learn an HX Stomp, and I don't have to go over there and program things on the fly. So that's going to be like a jack of all trades overdrive pedal, because the tuner and overdrive is pretty much all you need with most amps. I'll have delay and chorus I can add, and all that fun reverbs and stuff to add for icing, but that's not the core demonstration that's necessary for an amplifier. So anyway, let's get to some of these questions, and I'll try to go a little bit faster. And no, I don't bring up voltage slowly on brand new electrolytics. If there's a bad cap, I'll just power it on with the light bulb limiter. If there's a problem with the cap, that'll show up. Other than just power it up. I don't worry about the whole thing on a new cap. Only on an old cap that I'm testing. I don't believe in reforming old caps. Quality reverb pedal or accessory for it, man. That's a deep subject depending on your budget and what kinds of reverb you want, Walter. There's so many channels talking about reverb effects out there. See if you can find something that you like the sound of. And half the reverb videos out there are all worship leader things, worship guitar things, and no disrespect to anyone's religion, but my God, if you use that much reverb and delay in other genres of music, no one will hear you. It'll all get washed out. Most guys just need basically a plate or a small hall reverb just so that the audience hears, hey, that's wet. A lot of classic rock and roll was done dry and just with a little bit of ambience maybe, but when you hear it in a venue, there's got to be ambience there of the venue. So I think a lot of the stuff that you hear on YouTube videos is useless on stage unless you are playing that kind of ambient swarms of clouds of modulating, drifting stuff. Because if you do that once the drums kick in, all you're generating is a synth pad. You're not playing anything that anyone can discern from the third row. Sorry, soapbox on that, but it's too hard to recommend a particular thing without asking like 30 questions. Let's see. Yeah, Angus has done okay with above the 12th fret. SG, yeah, I like the Hercos too occasionally. The Hercos sometimes have a mold seam that gets annoying, and I like my what do you call it? The blue West German ones, the Edge uses, that's a real nice sound for certain things. Really makes stuff pop out, and it's Heiko. No, that's not Heiko. Anyway, it's not Herco, it's the other one. Anyway, those are fantastic occasionally, but it's a special purpose pick for me. Let's see, 62 Brown Deluxe, all original trannies, new old stock, 6v6. Plate voltage is high at 460, bias to 20 milliamps. Should I be concerned about... well, I don't know what 20 milliamps is on that. I know that the 62 Brown Deluxe I have here, when I gave it 114 wall volts and I biased it about 55% idle dissipation, my plates were about 440, 430, as I recall. So you may be biased really cold. You may be running 127 volts coming in on the wall. So first thing you need to do is figure out what wall voltage gets your heaters at 6.3, and that's your baseline. And you don't want to exceed 4. Herdime, thank you, Dan. Yeah, I love the Herdimes occasionally for certain things. Not to sound like I'm from Ireland, but the reason he likes them is the reason I like them. It really makes certain things stand out with delays and modulation, not to the sea of swim stuff, but to actually have some articulation. So I'm not sure should I be concerned about PV? I don't know what that is, but find what wall voltage makes your heaters happy. It's probably got to be about 114, and you don't want to exceed 450, mostly because of your screens. And if you can get it lower, that's great. People are upset that I asked that people be civil to each other. Well, you know. Just be civil. We shouldn't have to talk to each other about this. This is something that should have been settled in kindergarten. What is my favorite brand of signal capacitors and why? Sage's Owl Reviews. I don't have a single favorite. I have several go-tos depending on the application and to a degree the sound that I want. See my boring and even more boring videos. Those are the actual titles from last week where I talk about choosing components, including signal capacitors, coupling caps, and stuff like that. I get into that in pretty good depth there. Maui 150s are fine. I prefer for that application, I prefer the Vishay MKT 1813s, but it sure is hard to remember all this stuff. Let's see. Hey, Jolly Bobby Ogre. Filtering on USB cables. I've not done anything on that. I've had to invest in such a thing. This is a, let's see, it's got a stupid plastic thing on it that I've not taken off. Let me take that off so I can read what it is. This is the iDefender ground loop power noise remover. $50 that I should not have had to spend. And this is a USB-C to USB-B adapter. The HX Stomp's got a USB cable plug for some reason. Receptacle. and everything I have here is USB-C, hence the adapter. And if you have the HX Stomp hooked up into your amp and to a computer for editing purposes, you have there's a terrible ground loop. It makes it useless, and it's all because they have the USB ground connected within the HX Stomp, even though it's not getting power via USB, and it creates a ground loop. Not in everyone's system, but it certainly did in mine. And I tried just covering up the ground connector on the USB receptacle to just isolate the ground there. It didn't do it completely. That $50 piece of plastic did. It's separating the ground, probably running it through a capacitor. So there's a reference, but it's not coupled. And it seems ridiculous that line 6 didn't get that much better. It should have been, given when that thing was designed, it should have been USB-A, not B. And USB-C would have been preferable because it wasn't designed all that long ago. And they should have tested it to make sure there wouldn't be ground loops when you have it plugged into a computer, which is plugged into a power supply, which is connected to, in this case, a Motu M2, which is going out to two Yamaha HS7s, which are grounded because they have to be grounded for their power amps. And the audio cable out is going to an amplifier because I'm not using it just into a computer. If I was using it just via the USB connection to the computer and not having any audio cables going from it to the amp, I wouldn't have a ground loop. But they should have tested it both ways because there are other devices out there, Fractal, that don't have that issue. So it's not an isolation transformer on the 5 volt, and it's not using the 5 volt power from the computer at all for the HX Stomp, but that ground connection is the thing, and it irritates me. Curtis, always with your pair character doing a shaka sign with his hand saying, cool. I love that I don't get to see the stickers on here, just the verbal descriptions of stickers. I don't have a recommendation for a cheap tube tester, Alex 2112. I don't think a cheap tube tester is worth it. And the ones that are worth it are not cheap. I'm sorry. Thanks, Walter. I appreciate that. I appreciate that very much. Well, I never said RTV had anything to do with radio TV. Good. Ted, there are silicons which are safe to use in electronics, and that's what I use. And there are silicones which very much are unsafe, and I don't use those. The Panda, you want me to tell you need a 100-watt dumbbell combo. All right, you need a 100-watt dumbbell combo. I hope that makes you happy. I have no idea whether any of us need such things, but we tend to want them. And if I'm giving you permission to get the thing that you want anyway, that's nice if you buddy with an H. Thank you, Merrill. I appreciate that. I would love to work on those amps. I just don't want to take your amps in now and not even be able to look at them until September because, it just sets up for everyone for disappointment. Let's see. Thanks, Odds UK. Trying to get to the next questions. Thanks, Sean Blythe. Appreciate that. Any other prominent techs out there you should look out for? Yeah. So you got Brad, you got Jason, you got Yeatsy, Uncle Doug. I think Colleen Fazio is doing some really good stuff. Rift amps in the UK. Stewart UK amp guy's got some good stuff. I'm not sure I agree with him on everything. I think Chris in Australia, Your Amp Tech, I think his name, it does really good stuff. And there's another guy in the UK Martin, whose name escapes me right now. Please, someone put this in here. The name of his channel. He's another guy in the UK. He does fantastic stuff. He does lessons and amp repairs, and he has some really, really good stuff. We don't agree on everything, but that's fine. That's what makes life interesting. I don't see him doing any bad work. He just is more forgiving of bad design than I am. I'll say that. I guess that's the most diplomatic way to put it. Hey, Hillel. For first Variac, look earlier in the chat if you haven't already heard it. Yeah, Martin's tube amp workbench. Yeah. Thanks, Jim Cox. If you haven't heard earlier in the chat where I talked, yeah, well, he's got Jason Tong with Head First there, Ted. Jason T is what he's talking about. I talked about some options with Variacs. I also talked some options just using a uninterruptible power supply. Beyond that, for most people, the 5 and 10 amp Variacs from partsexpress.com will work. If you get one of those, just make sure that you have 120 volts coming in, and you take the knob off and turn the knob to where it says 120, and you have 120 coming out of it and into it. Take the knob off and move it till the line on the knob matches up to 120 on there, because they come out of the box all over the place. And they work fine for most things. Get the 10 amp if you can afford it. The 5 amp will do if you have Princetons and Deluxes and stuff. All depends on how many amps you're using at once as well. Guitars and amps rock. I'm going to copy and paste this if I can. I don't think you need to put your email address in here. Copy text. I'm going to make a note to myself. At least tell me your real first name so I don't call you Guitar and Amp Rocks J. And I'll see if I can find an answer for you, and I'll put it in the comments to this chat after it's over. James, all right, I'm putting you in here. I will see if I can find someone to do that for you. And you're in the Florida, Georgia area, the Georgia, Florida panhandle. Brad's already put out a question on that, and we'll see if I can get you an answer, James. Appreciate that. I do try to help, but I can't promise. I can't pretend to know things I don't know. Let's see. Tinker Cave Dweller. Now, Tinker Cave Dweller, like I was just saying a minute ago to Curtis, when you do a super sticker, it shows up on the YouTube feed, which I missed when this happened live because it would just been a little thing flying by. But now the program I actually use to do these streams doesn't show that sticker. It just says Paracharacter, exaggeratedly stretching his arm forward to offer a cup of coffee. So thank you for the Paracharacter extending a cup of coffee. Cups of coffee are always appreciated. Thank you. See you, Wes. Hey, Greg G., I don't have any recommendations for the AC4 C1. If you love the way it sounds while it's working, that's great. Use it till it dies and then get something else. I'm sorry. There's not much you can do to those. I guess you could open it up and find the screen grid and change it from 100 ohms or 470 to 1.5K and check the bias, but there's not a lot to do on those. They're just not built very well, which is a shame. Because the promise is great. ET65 is an incredible upgrade for that amp, though. So while it is working, you will really enjoy the sound of that speaker. Calibrating tube testers. All right. Ollie, Super Reverb 65, 100% original except bias, filter, bypass caps. That's good. Those should all be changed out. Intermittent problem with sound cutting out at gigs. Started to cut out to really low level volume. Now it's getting worse, no volume at all. Well, it could be just a preamp tube. The first thing I would do if someone called me to say that, I'd say, so that's what's doing on the reverb channel. Is it doing it on the normal channel? The reverb channel uses 5 of the 6 preamp tubes in the amp. The normal channel uses 2 of the 6 reverb tubes in the amp. So I always troubleshoot issues like that using the normal channel because it takes so many tubes out of the question, and then you only have to roll 2 tubes. Does it do it on both channels? Well, swap out the phase inverter. Does it do it on both channels, but it does it more on the second channel? It could be the shared cathode on V2. Next thing I would look at, if I get that exact description, especially on a 65, I assume it's a 65, not a 65 reissue. If it's from 1965, the boards warp. And let's see if I've got one handy. Not handy, but I'll show you on this basement board. The boards warp. This one does not warp very much. It depends on where they've spent their lives. This one only has this one horizontally mounted resistor right here, which you can't see. That one horizontally mounted resistor. I just said something awful, I think. The horizontally mounted resistors, as the board flexes, can pull out of their solder joints. And on your amp, right here, there is a 100 ohm resistor going from the 22K, this is a 6.8K, but there's a 22K on yours, going to here where this cap is. And then there's a horizontally mounted 100 ohm resistor going from here to here. And if that board is flexed, it's very common for that resistor to pull out, and that is making the ground reference for your entire phase inverter. And sometimes that lead will sit in the solder joint but not be attached to the solder, and it'll sometimes work and sometimes won't. And as it gets dirtier, it works less and less, and it's a very easy thing to reflow. That's the most common failure in all the reverb, 60s Fender amps. And that's exactly the symptom you would experience. So check that first because it is the cheapest one. Tube swapping and resoldering that resistor are the cheapest of the options. Sometimes each one of those ground points has a wire going from the board and is soldered to the brass control strip. Here's the panel right here, and it just soldered there. Sometimes as the board flexes, those wires pull out of those solder joints, and that can also cause that problem. So those 3 things to check. Yeah, power conditioners don't do much, sadly. They look great in racks back in the 90s, though. Juan Luna, you got Friedman that's getting a little bit hot when you touch the standby and off switch. It's a small box combo. Now, I admit I was reading this part of the chat when I was on the last break, just to see how it was looking and sounding and stuff. And you already got the right answer, which is contact Dave. It should be under warranty, and he does great customer support. It should not be doing that, but is it getting hot or is it getting warm? Warm can be normal, hot should not be, but he will stand behind his product and take care of you. Anything electronically can go wrong. The way to measure whether a company is good is what happens when it goes wrong. Sir, Friedman, Top Hat, Germino, if something goes wrong, you will be taken care of, and it's much less likely that anything will go wrong. There are companies like Tone King, where their Sky King had a serious flaw in the PCB, and they redid the PCB, and they are having that PCB changed for owners who have experienced that issue. So I don't think it was as well built to begin with as the other companies, but they are standing behind their product, and that counts for an awful lot in my book. Hey, Ron, I have no opinion on Jensen PR10R FEN in a reissue Vibrolux reverb because I've never heard of the ones that end in an FEN. P10Rs, I'm not a huge fan of. I'm not a fan of most of the reissue Jensens these days. They tend to be pretty bright and not have very much low end compared to the old ones. Though, in fairness, the old ones were much more MIDI typically. The Jensens would not be my choice in a Vibrolux reverb reissue. Neither would I choose the 68. I would choose the 65. But if you have the 68, but speaker recommendations are tough. I've got a whole bunch of 10 and 12-inch speaker demos on the channel. You can listen to those and see what sounds good to you. I don't need to tell you what you should like. I have worked on Music Man amps, Daniel Electrics. I've worked on quite a few. I don't think I have any on this channel yet. I'm sure some will come back in. I've got some on the old Facebook page. I don't remember if they're videos or whether it was back when I was doing the photo galleries. Music Mans are very cool for certain things. I mean, there's a very much a character amp, so to speak. But yeah, I've worked on quite a few of them. The tremolo is crunchy and inconsistent at high def setting. Trying to remember which tremolo circuit they used in that. Could be a lot of things on that. It could just be your bias is off. The main thing to look at in Music Men, I'm just going to say Music Men is the correct plural because otherwise it hurts my head. Much like I discussed on the wavy board on the 65 Super Reverb, there's a fiber board near the output tubes on your amp that also does the twist over time and has a lot of horizontally mounted components, and a lot of those solder joints crack and warp. And the first thing I do on any Music Man is I remove that old solder and I check for any broken leads, any leads which have corrosion on them, and then I clean all that and I reflow it, and then I'll change out all of the old electrolytics at that point and clean the pots. And sometimes I have to clean tube sockets. Sometimes because they have such high plate voltage, the old tubes need to be changed. But that's pretty much the extent of the service I've had to do on them. I've not had any weird issue with tremolo on those, but any of those caps in the horizontally section, that's a low voltage supply, is in there. So those could be the cause of what you're having. And that's a very common failure for Music Man amps. Thanks, Lance Lucifer. Appreciate that. Thanks, William L. Appreciate that. Yeah, I'm doing a lot better. It lasted almost 3 weeks, and as I showed earlier, rather disgustingly, all the old skin was brown. It looked like I had, some kind of radiation burn all over my hand, and that is peeling off, and I have nice, fresh, pale skin, so I've got to go out and re-tan my hand in the next week or so. But it's fun. I won't do that again. Is it ever okay to sell an expensive boutique-ish amp with pots on PCB? Yeah, absolutely. There's nothing inherently wrong with putting the pots on a PCB. It depends on the quality level of the pots, how easy it is to remove the PCB when it is necessary to change anything, how easy is it to clean the pots when they're mounted on the PCB. But there's no inherent problem with it. You just have to make sure that mechanically the stress is all, the mounting of the pots is done to the bushing, and there's no mechanical stress being shared with the PCB, at which point it can be a very efficient way both to increase the speed of production and to have to remove inconsistency from amp to amp. So if there's nothing magical in those connections, you can do it poorly or you can do it well, and that's going to happen whether it's PCB or wire. Like I've got this 58 Bassman with all this new wire on it, and when I'm done, when I put this back inside, all the excess will magically be gone, and everything will be very neat and run where it's supposed to be. And stuff for one triode will not be overlapping with the stuff from the next triode. But if I put all this in here and just put it in here, it's hand-wired, but it'd be hand-wired by an idiot who didn't know what they're doing, and the thing would be noisy, versus the same circuit done in PCB by someone who knew what they were doing would sound better than a bad hand-wired version. So it's all about the designer and all these decisions, but pots on a PCB is not a scary thing. Hey Dre, see, here's a trick, and I don't mean to be confusing. What brands would I recommend in order of quality of sounds, reliability to record at home between $2,000 and $4,000? I don't know what sounds you're doing, because if you're doing country, then the amp that would do the world's best metal sounds is not your thing. If you're doing metal, and I recommend something that's ideal for jazz and blues, you're not going to be happy with that. So I would need more information. I can just list off a bunch of good brands, but you probably want a more targeted selection. And there's never just the $2,000 and $4,000 amp to record at home. How are you recording it? I would rather have a real good $2,000 amp and an aux box or similar if I lived in an apartment than a really great $4,000 amp that I can only use for 30 minutes a day, or I have to put it, in an isolation box, and then it all sounds boxy and small because I can't afford a real good one. A $4,000 amp recorded in a closet so you don't get evicted doesn't sound very good. So there's a lot more stuff there. Juan Luna says, Dave replied by email, said, yeah, they get pretty warm. Maybe I'm traumatized by playing a hot ride for so long. It feels really, really warm. Not sure what to do. Well, here's what you do, Juan. This is on that Friedman with the hot switches. Don't add a fan. No offense, Lou. Trust Dave. Amps can get very hot. As long as it's not physically painful to touch, you're okay. As long as the plastic is not warping, it's fine. The transformer can handle more heat than your skin can. Unless you're getting to the point where you're going to get burned, don't worry about it. If it gets bad and something fails, you can call Dave and say, hey, I ran it anyway because you said it was they just run warm. And he'll say, well, I obviously told you wrong. Send it in. He'll take care of you. But Dave knows that amp better than anyone. And some things, because of where he has to put things physically, they're going to get warm. That's all right. Murphy Vienna, Hiwatt, DR 50478, Highlight, PT, all right, 97 Drakes. Okay. Can't break up, dimed, all this. Possible the bias needs to be adjusted. It is the ER 504 is a very, very clean amp, or is designed to be. What guitar are you using, and are you, it gets into that. Live at Leeds is not every Hiwatt does live at Leeds. A lot of Hiwatts are voiced to do Dark Side of the Moon on tour. Great big clean Strat thing. So I would see what the bias actually is. I would confirm that all the components are correct. Hiwatts don't always get things right, not just on the new ones, but sometimes like in one place on the board, there's a 22K next to a 2.2K resistor. Sometimes those get reversed, and the amp doesn't sound that great. So check that kind of stuff. Well, hey, I'm kind of excited that you're asking your first question on stream 2, and it's a 76, not 78. So I'm sorry it took me like an hour to get to your question. But I try to get there before the end of the chat. Make sure that all the components are exactly as they're supposed to be, or have that done for you. Make sure the bias is correct. Make sure the voltages are within the spec of what they should be. At the end of the day, a 76 Hiwatt DR504 may not be the amp that you want, in which case it's intrinsically valuable. You could sell it and get something else that you would want. I would not spend too much time trying to change that 76 Hiwatt into something else if it turns out not to be in stock form the amp of your dreams. Hey, Farmer David. Hey, that's if you like the non-reverb Princeton, that's great. I love the C10N. The C10N is a beautiful, clean speaker. That's a definite upgrade in a Princeton. You can always add an overdrive pedal, or you can do what I have on that one that came in the other day. I didn't add it, but it's a good addition. With the negative feedback switch, then you have a little bit more grit on tap. Just a tiny touch. Just a little smudge. Just a little zhuzh. Koch and Wang. I am not a fan of Black Star amps. I apologize, but no, I'm not. See my amps under $500 video for more on that. Yeah, those Ks, anything without a power transformer, scary. Oh yeah, Mary Lynn Whalen? Is there a proper order turning on and off old tube amps? Standby, then power on. Well, you power them on with the standby switch set to standby. Now, you'll see in some of my videos, some amps which have standby do not need standby. Some amps which have standby, the standby actually hurts the amp, but that's beyond the scope of this answer. For right now, let's assume that the company knew what they're doing. Power it on with the amp in standby. Wait a minute, take it out of standby. When it's time to power it off, just turn it off. You don't need to put the amp back in standby first. It does nothing except keep voltage stored in the preamp capacitors where it doesn't need to be. That's all there is to it. And people make it this big complicated thing, and it's not. And yeah, like Murphy Vienna says, standby. Think of it as preheat, not standby. Hey, Tom. Fix your Kanji. Yeah, the 57, and you said, do I use a cloud lifter? No. With the 57 set here, so I'm alternating. I'm moving around a bit. I'm running into a Motu M2 with the gain at 3 o'clock, and that has given me a typical peak of about -6, -8, and then I'm running 3-to-1 compressor. And then I'm running a limiter, which gives me a 3 dB boost, but limits the output to -2 or -1, I don't remember. So, and then I've got a second level adjustment in the program I'm using to stream Ecamm. So I cannot clip the Ecamm, and I can't really clip the Motu. But as I move around, to a degree, the compressor evens things out. Not a lot. I mean, if I get over here, you hear it. But enough that I don't have to be right here the whole time. But if I do get right here, then I can speak more softly and still have quite a bit of level. But I find that this gives a good signal noise ratio. And I mean, I've got a fan there. It's only on 3 just to make it nicer for me. And you don't tend to hear it in the background because it's directly off axis of the 57. So cloud lifters are really only necessary on SM7s for dynamics. And there are better devices out there than the cloud lifter. The new version of the SM7 has got that built in. You pay $100 and it's built into the mic. They should have done that 20 years ago. All a cloud lifter is a fixed FET boost. But I found the Motu Pre is clean enough that I don't need to do any of that. There's no real noise floor addition from that. I mean, there is technically, but so below what you guys are at here. And the 57 has a much louder output. I think a 6 or 8 dB more output than the SM7. So I haven't need to spend any extra money. The VIP kit, yeah, it's just a windscreen and a shock mount mounted on this Elgato arm. Looks fancy, doesn't it? And it sounds like what I need a mic to sound like for this. Thank you for getting my hot fuzz quote. Hey, Dan Brockman. I don't remember if I said that or not. I might have said be careful. the 68 champs are very different than the 50s champs as far as impedances go, though. So the Tweed champs had some different had triad transformers versus the Schumachers you're getting in the late 60s. You do always need to be careful, but you can mismatch 4 to 8 or 4 to 2, but you don't want to mismatch 4 to 16. I mean, granted, I started this whole stream mismatching 2 to 8 with the concert, but the concert was at a very low volume, and I wasn't going to be doing it for very long. But the 2 ohm load that's in there with the speakers that came in with it just sounds so bad. I didn't want you guys to have to listen to that. What are my thoughts on Kempers or amp sims in general? With the caveat that the Kempers and the Tonex stuff are captures versus models. That's a whole other subject. I'm not opposed to them in concept. I have the HX Stomp, which is, where the good stuff starts pretty much. Mostly for effects use, but having played around with it, and I'll share my findings in coming weeks. I find that certain styles of amps it does very, very well. Other amps it doesn't do as well without making a lot of changes which are non-intuitive because the controls on the actual amp don't work at all the way the controls on this model do. The fractal stuff, it's a much more realistic one-to-one relation, but the fractal costs, $2,000 more than that. This is the $500 entry level. Fractal is doing amazing things. Line 6 is doing amazing things for the price. Kemper has been doing a really valuable thing, and the Tonex stuff is doing an incredible version of that, again, like at the Line 6 price point, $500 or less. The issue with capture versus modeling is that a capture, if you wanted to really turn up the treble and turn up the gain, you would have to have a separate capture of the amp where that was, they had higher gain and higher treble on that, because the controls on the capture devices are artificially affecting things within a range of kind of predictive range based on the snapshot taken of the actual amp. And so if I take a Marshall lead and I do a capture with the volume at 9 o'clock, I can't turn the gain up on a Kemper. I can't turn the gain up on a Tonex and have it sound at all like what happens on the Marshall as I turn the gain up. I'd have to have a separate capture of that Marshall with its gain turned up. And then between the two, I might have to have 4 captures of the same amp, just changing the gain. And then this one could go like this, and this one could go like this, and this one could go like this one could go like this to build it. Whereas if you get a really good model of that amp, and again, that you have to go to Fractal for that pretty much, then you really have a good modeling of that, but they're modeling one particular amp typically, and not all Marshalls sound the same. So I'm saying all this out of interest and to show that I'm not a snob. None of them are perfect yet, but no tube amps are perfect. I can see the appeal and I can see the value. I would not want at this point in my life to only have digital, but I could see the value of saying, yeah, I've got a Deluxe Reverb, and for everything else I use a Kemper, or for everything else I'm using Tonex, or for everything else I'm using the Line 6. But I've not heard any of the modeling that really feels and or sounds like an actual good 60s Fender or 50s Fender, et cetera, et cetera. And people, whenever I say it, people are like, this guy, I'm not going to name names, did a shootout of the real deal versus this, and no one could tell the difference. I'm like, yeah, well, that guy couldn't tell the difference, and he had a compressor pedal on the whole time. So, I see a lot of questionable decisions made on such things. And I'm just saying, I play 60s Deluxe Reverbs all the damn time, and I know what they feel like, how they respond, and the stuff in the HX doesn't feel or respond that way. The Dream 65 doesn't feel or respond that way. Both of them, you can get very nice sounds that are very pleasant to play, that are very reminiscent of Fender, but neither one is a one-to-one replacement. We're not there yet. Sorry for the long answer. I know we're running out of time, but that's been something I've been thinking about a lot lately. Let's see. I think since we're down to like 7 minutes, I'm going to have to just run through and catch any super chats. Not that I value the super chatters more than I value the rest of you, but if someone has given me a super chat, I damn well better answer them, right? And it's a compact. Hey, JB. Talked to JB the other day. As you warned, I'm having trouble with the reverb in the VibraChamp reverb. I don't use the reverb much, so I would recommend preparing it, removing it, or keeping it turned down. The reverb in the VibraChamp reverb, that's the new one, is digital, and it's a little drop-in daughter card. I would suggest that you contact your Fender dealer. I don't know whether hopefully it's in warranty. I don't know. In your case, JB, I don't know if that'd be Yarborough's or Guitar Center, and see if you can get a warranty replacement. And they're going to insist that it goes to a Fender authorized service center. But if you can sweet talk them and just sending the board, I'd put it in there for you, no charge. It's an easy drop-in replacement. But if you need to bring it to one of those places and authorize Fender service center and have them drop in the board, that'd be fine. If it is not in, it should still be in warranty. My concern is that when those goes out of warranty, will those boards be available to anyone except authorized service centers? How much will the authorized service center charge you to diagnose that it's just that board, or will they try to do a bunch of other stuff? How long will that board be available? Fender's got a really bad track record. Like if you used to have a Champ XD and the DSP board went out, well, Fender doesn't make that model anymore, and they ran out of those boards. They're not offering them anymore. You're just dead in the water. I believe your amp works fine with that board pulled without reverb. So if not, I could probably make it work fine without reverb. I think the reverb card is just the reverb and the send return stuff. But first, try to get a replacement card for it from Fender under warranty while they have them. I don't take any joy in being right about that. Well, thank you, Brian. Appreciate that very much. And I know I'm skipping past other questions. I want to make sure I have, thanks, Hal. I want to make sure I have any super chats answered before we close up. Hey, RJ. Oh, that's very nice. Get all the beer money now that Brad has stopped drinking for the month. Thanks, man. I appreciate that. RJ does some nice tubey ampy things too. You guys check him out. Thanks, Tom, about the cleaner and lube reply. Friend has a Clapton VibraChamp. He calls it Crapton. Yeah, it's a shame. I wish these players realize how much they can tarnish their legacy by putting their name on all kinds of products that really don't serve their fans. Thanks, Greg G. Appreciate that. How many people are on here right now? So we have 693 comments, but that's all. I don't have an easy way of seeing how many people are on here at once. I need to up my analytics game. Let's see. There's a lot of good stuff as you're talking to each other about gear in here. I always go back and reread all this stuff because there's stuff I miss at the time just because we run out of time. And I like seeing what you guys say to each other. I like being part of the conversation. in one way, I'm in the worst. I have the worst seat in the house because I'm always behind. Let's see. So many things. All right, I'm trying to catch up. Thank you, Juan. I appreciate that. Let's see. Is there any other super chats I've missed? All right, I'm towards the end now. So, all right, we got another 2 minutes. Let me remember to hit this thing I never remember to hit. I'm supposed to do this kind of stuff all the time, and and I'm the one who's telling myself to do this. I'm supposed to do all this stuff. I'm supposed to tell you guys to like and subscribe, blah, 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 smash that something or other, point to random places on the screen where things were 6 months ago, but YouTube moves them. And I tend not to do that in the videos. So, help a brother out. I also could have made you guys watch, like, let's see, in 3 hours, like 30 ads that I did not make you guys watch. And I don't subject you guys to the ads other channels do. So all I ask is that you like. Please hit like. I know if you're watching on TV, it's harder, but it really does help things out as far as if you like it. If you like this kind of thing, YouTube will show you other things like this. If you like this, other people who have similar interests will find it, and I make more money, and I like money. I've become sadly rather reliant on it over the course of my life. I've tried to go cold turkey. It turns out I couldn't afford turkey. So, here he is. And I'm not badgering you all the time about liking and subscribing and all that, but 4K videos take a while to put together, just saying. And not a lot of channels like this do 3 hours twice a month answering as many questions as possible. And I will never be able to answer all the questions in any one chat, and I apologize. If I did another hour, there'd be another hour's worth of questions. So we don't need no stinking badgers, okay? So if I did not get to your question this time, please come back next time. Try to get her earlier in the chat, and I will answer them as I come to them. But I do try to answer them in the order that they're asked, which means that the last ones don't always get answered. Sorry. And the Sir Badger is a great sleeper app. And maybe I shouldn't say things like that because psst. The following apps are worth way more than people charge for them. Don't tell the rest of the internet or we can't afford them anymore. The Badger's one of those. All right. You guys have a great weekend. Enjoy yourselves. Be safe. All that fun stuff. And I'll look for lots of crazy videos this week as things get finished up.